Alright guys, so quiet down everyone, let's get started with the second part. You guys come and check out this thing. I found a lot of animals actually. Or not, the produce, right? There was one animal though, right? I passed down my video that I shot for you guys. Did you guys take a look at it? What did you guys find in there? A worm. Can you guys tell me the phylum of that worm that you guys saw? It was not an annelida. Are you just guessing? It was a nematoda. It was, okay. But if you guys saw it, it had a tapered end. It was clear and small, right? Maybe you guys recognize it as a nematoda. Okay, so that was the worm. If you were not sure what it was, you can, take a look at the video at the end again. But yeah, it was pretty cool. We found a nematode in here, and I was able to find about like 2 or 3 other protists. So yeah, cool stuff. Okay, so anyways, let's get going on this. Oh yeah, before I start, I told you guys about this yesterday, but I'll just show you guys again. I've been posting the lectures on YouTube. You should just search up marine biology lecture MtSAC, and then you can put my name, and I think they'll all come up right here. So I've been posting these lectures. If you guys don't make it to class for whatever reason, then you guys can check these things, okay? But I didn't mention this until now because I didn't want to encourage you guys to skip class or anything, but now that's after the midterm, you kind of know how the class works, so you guys can always check those resources. Okay. So let's get going on this. All right, we are gonna be talking about ecosystems. Okay, so we're gonna stop talking about organisms. We're gonna move on to talk about ecosystems. Now, ecosystem. This is probably the more fun half of the class, in my opinion. And memorizing all those byline classes is the tedious part, right? But now that part is done with, we can go through the ecosystems and identify all the organisms that live inside of them. Because hopefully we got those mostly down by now. Okay. The first ecosystem we're gonna talk about is the Epi Pelagic. It also means the open ocean ecosystem, basically like the main marine ecosystem out there. And when we talk about ecosystem, I want you guys to focus on a couple things. I want you guys to focus on the organisms and their adaptations, okay? And the reason why organisms have adaptations is that every ecosystem or environment provides some sort of challenge for the organisms that live inside of it. And if you want to live inside that ecosystem, you have to rise up to those challenges using some sort of adaptation. Okay, so we're going to be talking about all the different challenges and what the organisms did or what they evolved in order to cope and be able to live here successfully. Okay, so let's get started. Epipelagic, let's just describe it first. All right, here is just a sideways profile of what the ocean zones look like. Okay, so pelagic, keep in mind, means there's like nothing underneath you. Right, it's just water column, open ocean swimming around. Okay, so these things don't crawl, these things don't walk around, these things don't rest, they're not sessile either. They're drifting around in the open ocean. Okay, let's look at these names. Epi means outside or top, like epidermis, right? So epipelagic is the top, the first 200 meters, that's the epipelagic. That's what we're going to talk about, right? The rest of the zones, right? Mesopelagic, meso means middle, bathy means deep, abyssal pelagic means bottom of the ocean, right? If you ever heard someone talking about something abysmal, like your grades, right? Bottom of the ocean, right? And hadopelagic, the very deepest parts of the trench, because hado means hell, right? So those are different parts of the deep sea, and when we cover the deep sea, we'll be covering these parts, but for today, we would just be covering the very top because almost everything important happens at the top. Why? Because it's also known as the Photic Zone. What do you think that means? Light. It has light, exactly. So the Epipelagic zone goes down to 200 meters deep, and it's just that shallow. The rest of them are much bigger, right? It's only that shallow because we're only concerned with the part that sunlight penetrates, right? So sunlight can reach this area, enough sunlight that you can do photosynthesis, that's the important part, and therefore we also call it sunlight zone, the sunlit zone, the photic zone, the euphotic zone, right? All these different names for the epipelagic zone. It is known for having sunlight, okay? Also, considering that it is the shallowest of the zones, it is actually the warmest of the zones, right? Because remember the temperature profile. This part of the ocean is above the thermocline, which it doesn't really mean it's like warm or anything. It just means that it's just warmer than the rest of the ocean, right? The rest of the ocean being cold down below. Okay, so this is the top of the ocean, and it has sunlight. That is probably the most important thing, and it goes down to 200 meters. Okay. Okay, so let's take a look at how are the organisms able to live in the top 200 meters? Well, if they want to move around, there are two ways. You either drift or you swim, right? These are the two different ways. Now, we just finished a whole lecture on organisms that drift around. What are those called? Plankton, exactly. So if you drift, then we call you a plankton, right up there, right? If you swim, then we call you a nekton, right? That's a strange word, but now you guys know the opposite of plankton is nekton, something that swims around in the open ocean. Something that crawls around is not a nekton, okay? You have to swim around in order to be nekton, right? So this yellowfin tuna, for example, is a nekton. What phylum and class is this again? Phylum Chordata, class Osteichthyes, right? And then maybe we can look through here and name some of the animals. For example, what is this? This thing right here. There's another little one right here. That's a copepod, right? And you guys remember what this is? A diatom. Good. We should know some basic plankton, right? Okay, so anyways, plankton versus nekton, right? Those are the two ways to go about living here. Well, here's the thing. You can drift, you can swim, but the universal rule is you must stay above 200 meters, right? These things, they must find a way to stay in the Epipelagic zone above 200 meters, right? So let's just see all the ways they go about doing this, right? They have to stay here, even though there's no bottom. If there's no bottom, there's no substrate, then you can't rest, all right? These organisms living in the Epipelagic are treading water for their whole life, right? That's what you guys can call them. Okay, so how do they do that? How do they tread water their whole life? 3 different ways: increasing drag, floating, and generating lift, right? The 3 different strategies. Some of them may have more than one, but these are ways to stay above 200 meters, right? Staying near the top of the ocean. So let's look at how they go about doing that. Now we'll talk about increasing drag first. Okay? Now, just before we talk about that, do you guys know what drag is? What is it?
Opposing force, but force against the...
Yeah, it's an opposing force depending on your velocity, right? So like if you are driving forward, the wind in front of you is actually preventing your car from moving forward, right? If there were no wind in front of you, you'd move forward much faster, all right? If you swim in the water, or no, like if you try running in the water, you notice it's really hard to run in the water because the water is pushing you back. That's drag. Okay. So if you increase the drag, then it'll allow you to stay in the upper 200 meters, and I'll explain why in a second. So let's look at ways to increase drag, right? Okay, we have stuff like eel larva, right? This would be an 11, right? A fish larva. And here we have a diatom, and these guys are flat. Flat things increase surface area, and if you increase surface area, you'll increase drag. Okay? So the idea of increasing drag is to prevent sinking, because you realize that sinking is a downward motion, and if you have a lot of surface area, then you will sink slowly. Right? Think about a leaf versus a rock dropping. The leaf with the surface area is going to drop slower because it has more drag, has more air resistance. Okay? And here we're concerned with water resistance, right? But the same thing applies, drag. So increasing surface area is one way. The second way to increase surface area is to have spines. So now we know, why is it the case that all these little plankton have spines on them? They're trying to increase their surface area in order to increase drag and sink slower. Right, so being flat, having spines, and lastly, look at this picture. Does this look like a diatom to you guys? Right, a diatom looks like a circle, right? Why? How is this a diatom? Well, that's a diatom, that's one, that's one, that's one, that's one. A little bit more convincing, right? What did they just do? They formed chains with one another, and forming chains is another way to increase your surface area and sink slower. Okay, so those are the 3 ways of increasing drag. Notice all 3 of these things that are involved in increasing drag and sinking slower are all plankton. Because plankton cannot swim upwards and against, you know, the water and all that stuff. They rely on other forces such as buoyancy and increasing drag like this. Okay, because they're all constantly sinking. The idea though is to increase your drag so that you sink slowly enough that, you know how the water in the ocean is naturally moving and stuff? That the natural motion of the water pushes them back up to the surface before they sink to the bottom. Right? That's the goal. Right? Their goal is to be able to be pushed back by the natural motion of the water before it sinks below 200 meters. Okay? Now keep in mind, why do we want to stay above 200 meters? Well, if you're a plant, that would be pretty useful to stay above, right? You need the sunlight. And if you're an animal, you want to eat. All the food is above 200 meters. Right? So those are incentives to stay above 200 meters. And this is the first way they go about doing so. Increasing drag. Okay? Now when you get big enough, then drag doesn't really matter anymore because you usually sink so fast that the drag, any increasing drag doesn't really help you. So for bigger organisms that are not plankton, what do? The second thing to do is floating. All right? How about just float and you'll stay above 200 meters, right? That's the second method. Okay, so look at these guys. These are 4 organisms that use air to float, right? What better substance to use than air? Air is the best substance to use if you want to float because it's really like light, right? Yeah, do right?
Wouldn't that go back to the whole reptiles in the water where if they go to the air, they're more likely to be attacked by animals on the surface?
Yeah. So if something goes up for air, it is likely to be attacked. That is true, but these organisms are trying to stay above 200 meters, right? So you gotta weigh the consequences. Vulnerability versus sinking to the depths, right? I would go with the vulnerability. I mean, like, you're not gonna get attacked every second, but you do need to stay above 200 meters, for sure. Okay, so floating, right, using air to float, and plus, these things, none of these things are like, I would say, that worried about being attacked, just because I think all 4 of these things, there's like, what do you call it? It's like a type of species in which there's just so many of them that they're kind of built to be eaten and it doesn't matter. Right? For example, grass. I mean, like, grass is so ubiquitous and it doesn't even care that it gets eaten all the time, right? Because it just grows so fast. So it's kind of like an animal like that. Okay, so these things, these all use air to float. Okay, so maybe before I talk about the air floating thing, let's classify them real quick. Okay, so let's talk about what type of animal is it and what phylum is it in, right? So I'll give you this one. This is a snail and is in phylum Mollusca, right? So what is this again? It's a hydroid, Portuguese man o' war, and is in the phylum Cnidaria. Yeah. This is, what is this? Sargassum, yeah, a type of algae. And what phylum is it in? Phaeophyta, right. And then that leaves the last one. What is this? Yeah, I mean, when I saw that for the first time, I didn't even know what that was. But, what do you guys think? If you guys can figure it out based off its symmetry, its body parts maybe, I don't know. It is, yeah, maybe you already knew that, right? This is a type of sea slug, right? A nudibranch. It's called a blue dragon. Anyways, all these guys, they use air to float. How? Well, this one has an air bladder. This one has a bunch of small air pods or air bladders, right? This one builds a little bubble raft that it floats on, and this one swallows air. Okay, so using air to float is a very good way because air is just so, low density. That's also the reason that we mentioned earlier, reptiles with a lung full of air having a hard time sinking, right? Because the air is so buoyant. Okay, so using the buoyant force of air to help you stay up, right? That's one good way. Okay, and this opens up a really interesting set of plankton, right? If you guys notice, this, and this are all types of plankton. They float around. But there's a difference between this type of plankton and a normal type of plankton. This type of plankton with its air bladders, they always float at the same place in the ocean. Where? Right at the surface. Okay, because air is super low density. You cannot float anywhere else. It'll always go to the surface. These things are always found right at the surface of the ocean. So for plankton that are found there, we have special classification for those. So let's look into those. For these ones, their whole body is underwater, but they're always at the surface. We call them noosed, right? A type of plankton in which you always float at the surface, but your whole body is underwater. What's the difference between noosed and pluised?
The body's not underneath.
Part of the body is above the water. Okay, so like a ship, right? A ship would be considered a pluised because half of the ship is underwater, half of the ship is above, right? An iceberg, right? Iceberg, like 90% is below, 10% is above, would be kind of like a pluised. It's not living, but it would be like that. Okay, so we have two new types of plankton. So apparently there's a fourth type of plankton, right? A fourth classification in which it is called where do you float in the ocean, right? If you float at the surface, then you'd either be a noosed or a pluised, depending on if your whole body or part of your body is above. Okay, so far, air looks like a really good way to float, right? Getting back to other things that use air to float, right? Let's just skip past these ones. Fish also use air to float, right? We learned that they have a swim bladder. Right? Fish's swim bladder, right? They use air to float. They can control the size of that swim bladder and go up and down, right? It's pretty cool. They actually use air to float. Now remember, a swim bladder is a uniquely osteichthyan adaptation. Who does not have the swim bladder? Like chondrichthyes, right? Sharks and rays. They don't have a swim bladder. Instead, what primitive organ do they use to float? Their liver. Why is their liver buoyant? It's full of oil, exactly. So going back to the shark that does not have a swim bladder with air, it has a big liver full of oil, right? This is the second way to float, floating using oil. Now, floating using oil is not as good as floating using air, but it's okay, right? It kind of gets the job done, right? It'd be better if it had a swim bladder, but we'll make do with the oily liver, right? So using oils to float because oil is also less dense than water. Right, so besides sharks, who else uses oil? Well, maybe if you guys eat fish, you notice that there's some fish, like white meat fish, that are not very oily, and some with like red meat are very oily, right? So, I'll give you some examples. Sardines, mackerel, herring, salmon, right? Those guys, all oily fish, right? Now we know why they're so oily, because they have oils in their flesh, which makes their whole body less dense. Okay, so it actually helps them float in the ocean, right? And where do you find these fish? In the Epipelagic, right? Where do you find white meat fish? Probably in shallow water or maybe living under rocks or something, right? But you have in the open ocean, you have like red meat fish like this that have really oily flesh because it helps them stay afloat, right? So having the oil directly in your flesh for fish like this, having it in your liver like a shark, right? Or having the oil in the rest of your body like these things, okay? Diatoms, copepods, and even fish eggs float around because they are oily. Okay? Yes.
Did you say the oil? I don't know if this is connected to fish. Did you say the oil count or like oil in the fish body, like it goes toward like how much fat is inside fish?
Yes, of course.
Okay.
Right, yeah. If a fish is very oily, I'm not surprised that it's considered a fatty fish. Right? Okay, so you can float either using air or you can use oil, and I've given you a few examples of each of them, right? So these guys, they all have oils inside their bodies, and those things help it stay up above 200 meters. Okay, so floating using oil. Okay, let's just say that surface area is not enough, having oils is not enough, having air, actually no, having air is always enough pretty much. But what if having oil is not enough? Then we might need an additional way to stay buoyant. All right, and the last one is be like an airplane, right? So you have an airplane with its wings, and it generates lift by forcing air down, and by doing so, the opposite motion occurs, is the airplane is forced up, all right? So what types of animals out there have wings like an airplane? Well, there we go, right? Sharks, okay? So sharks with their, what is this called again? I wrote it down here, right? Pectoral fins. Pectoral fins, stiff pectoral fins act like airplane wings, so they can generate lift with them. Okay. Tuna and other big fish like that also have stiff pectoral fins, and by swimming forward, they force water down, and the water kind of pushes them up. So it's another reason why sharks have to keep swimming, right? If they don't, then they will sink. Okay, as long as they keep swimming, then they will generate lift, and it will help push them up. All right, so this is a case in which the oily liver is not quite enough to support the weight of this muscular creature, and needs additional things like generating lift. Okay, everybody got on these? Right, so these are the three different ways to stay above 200 meters, right? And this is all because when you're in the epipelagic, there's no substrate for you to rest on. You have to tread water the whole time, and you have to remain above 200 meters. So the organisms here either try to increase drag, float, or generate lift in order to stay there. Okay? All right, so let's move on to the second thing. Feeding strategies in the epipelagic, right? How do you get your food? Well, for one, what is really plentiful in the epipelagic again? What is really plentiful? What's abiotic condition is really plentiful? There's actually not that many nutrients in the open ocean. Sunlight, yeah, because it's in the top 200 meters. There's a lot of sunlight. So inevitably, the most popular feeding strategy, right, is photosynthesis. Right? Photosynthesis is the most popular feeding strategy in the epipelagic. And that makes sense, right? When I say popular, it means most of the organisms here are doing it. And considering the fact that primary producers have the most biomass, do they have the most biomass? Yes, because they're on the bottom of the trophic pyramid, right? Then, you know, there's what's the most common organism? Phytoplankton, probably, right? And they're all doing photosynthesis. So photosynthesis is the most common feeding style here, and it's possible because there's sunlight, right? You go any deeper than 200 meters, and photosynthesis becomes impossible, pretty much. All right, so it's not a popular feeding style in the deep sea, but in the epipelagic, it is. Right? So photosynthesis supports primary producers such as sargassum and these little protists. Right? Who eats these little protists again? Zooplankton, such as copepods, yeah, okay, so we got zooplankton eating these guys. So there's also a lot of zooplankton in the epipelagic, okay? If there's a lot of phytoplankton, there's a lot of zooplankton, because zooplankton are also very low on the trophic pyramid. And so if there's a lot of zooplankton, there's probably gonna be a lot of filter feeders, right? Can anybody name a filter feeder in the open ocean? Let me ask you a question first. Is the filter feeder gonna be sessile, like a normal filter feeder? No, there's no substrate to land on, right? So it's gonna actually be a motile filter feeder. Do we know one such motile filter feeder? Sharks, okay, but more obviously a whale, right? So whales, right? Filter feeding whales like this, right? If you eat the floating plankton, then you get whales doing their filter feeding, suspension feeding. Right? Okay, so phylum Chordata, class Mammalia, we got these whales using their baleen to filter feed. Right? Okay, now here's the thing, plankton, do they run away from the whale? No, right? By definition, they cannot even swim away from the whale, right? Because they just swim around, they just drift around. So the whale is going around eating the plankton that is just drifting in the ocean. And does the whale have to chase after its plankton? No, it's not gonna run away. It just goes at it at its leisurely pace. It can afford to be slow. So what alternative word can we use to describe its feeding style? Grazing, exactly. So although this is not picking up something off the ground, you may consider whales going around eating plankton as also grazing, right? Sorry, I didn't write that down. Okay? So this could also be considered grazing. Okay, grazing on plankton. Okay, so yeah, if you eat plankton that doesn't move, then you can just go around being as slow as you want. Doesn't matter, right? You can even be sessile, and you'll still be able to catch plankton, right? Now, what happens if you decide not to eat plankton, but to eat these guys, right? These fish, right? Smelt and herring, they're fast, right? So, if you want to eat these fish, what does it tell about the predator that eats these fish? The predator must also be very fast. So now let's explore, how do you be fast in the open ocean? Right? How are you able to be fast? Let's look at some fast animals, right? Here's some fast ones. Sharks, tunas, right? Look at the tuna's pectoral fin. What's it good for? Generating lift, right? Okay, so fast organisms. Now there's a bunch of different ways to be fast. One is just by looking at the shape, right? Looking at the shape of this thing, can you tell that it's pretty fast? Right? What would you guys like to describe its shape as? Like aerodynamic. Yeah, sure, we can go with that. The word I'm going to teach you guys is fusiform shape, which means torpedo shaped or streamlined. Okay? I guess streamlined means aerodynamic, right? Fusiform shape, right? Why is it called that? Because I think it's comes from the word fuselage. Right, you guys know what a fuselage is? Right. It's like the body of the airplane without the wings, right? So like if you draw like an airliner, right, here's the body, and then you can attach its like tail and wings to it. It kind of looks like this, right? This is the fuselage right here. So if you just are shaped like that, then you have a fusiform shape, right? It's designed to be very efficient at going across a fluid, right? Air is a fluid, water is a fluid, and these guys have a fusiform shape. There you go, right? Torpedo shaped. Now, not only that, you don't want to just reduce drag. You also want to have powerful thrust. So, what body part should be modified for that? The tail, exactly, right? The tail provides the thrust. So the tails of the fastest fish, you'll notice the upper and lower lobes are roughly the same, symmetric tails, right? Having symmetric tails. Now, is this, I don't know if you guys know much about sharks, but is this the normal shape of a shark's tail? Normal shape of a shark's tail is actually not like that, right? This is only for certain sharks, like mackerel sharks, mako, great white, okay? Fast sharks like that. Normal sharks have a longer upper lobe, and those are not designed for speed, right? But the fast sharks that are designed for speed are gonna have symmetric tails like this. This comes from a tuna, right? If you guys see for like a marlin, those guys also have symmetric tails, right? Those provide very powerful thrust. Okay, so you guys can look at its tails, symmetric tails. Okay, so let's consider internal physiology now. If you want to be fast, should you be cold-blooded or warm-blooded? Warm, right? Warm-blooded organisms are capable of high-intensity activities because it raises your metabolism and makes your muscles more efficient, right? Okay, but here's the thing. What type of blood do these guys have? Cold. These are fish, right? Fish have cold blood. So it turns out that the very fastest of fish have an internal mechanism that makes them pretend that they're warm-blooded, right? It's a pretty cool blood temperature exchanging mechanism, right? It's called the countercurrent heat exchange, right? Countercurrent heat exchange, and I like to call it pseudo warm blood, like they're pretending, right, to be warm-blooded, right? So how does this work? Okay, so let's look at this diagram right over here. If you swim around, then your muscles are going to be generating heat. It doesn't matter if you're cold-blooded or you're warm-blooded. As long as you move around, you will generate heat, all right? Because heat is a byproduct of cell respiration, and you will always generate heat. That's why whenever you go for a run, you sweat because you generate a lot of heat. Your muscles use energy, and heat comes out of the reaction, okay, as a waste product. So the fish can generate its heat by swimming around. Now, when the fish generates its heat, these fish realize that, wow, look, I generated this heat. It wouldn't be nice if I could just hold on to it and keep my muscles warm for longer. That's what they're trying to do. So their body is warm, and their blood right now is warm. But the problem is when the blood goes out to the gills are in contact with the water to get more oxygen. But what temperature is the water? Cold. So you're sending your warm blood out to your gills where it becomes cold. That's going to be a waste of heat. You guys see that? Because as soon as the warm blood touches the the gills, it'll be cooled down by the cool ocean. So what do? They have another blood vessel that's positioned right next to their outgoing blood vessel, so that it's so close together that heat can transfer between these blood vessels. So what it does is it takes the blood that is coming back in from the gills. The blood that comes back in from the gills is definitely going to be cold, right? And heat always travels from warm to cold. So the warm blood here will travel to the cold blood here that comes back in and is able to do this jump because they're so close together, all right? And then once you give the heat over to this one, then this one brings the heat back into the body and you hold on to your heat. And when this one loses its heat, it becomes cold, and you send the cold blood to your gills, where it doesn't even matter anymore. It only matters if you send warm blood to your gills, because that loses heat. But if you send cold blood to your gills, then you don't care. Does that make sense? Right? Because it's already cold. How much colder is the ocean going to make it? Right? If you send warm blood to your gills, then you lost heat. But if you send cold water to your gills, then we're good. Right? So in order to send cold water to your gills, you take the warmth here and you pass it down to this blood vessel that's coming back in. That's really cool. Right? So that might make sense when I say it, but it'll make more sense if I show you the alternative. The alternative is the blood vessels are not spaced closely together. Let me draw that real quick. Okay, so here's the gills. And it's cold. This is not spaced closely together. So the warm blood going out, can it pass the warmth over to this side? It's too far. It cannot. You guys get what's going on now? And so what kind of blood is going to go out to the gills? Warm. What's going to happen here? It'll radiate all of its heat out to the water and lose it. And it's going to come back in as cold blood, and then it's going to cool down the rest of the animal, right? And that's bad, right? You don't want to be cool. You want to stay warm because warm blood functions better, all right? So instead, they position their blood vessel that's coming back in right next to this one, okay? Now can the warmth pass over? Yeah, you could pass the warmth over. And then when you pass the warmth from here to here, what temperature does this place become? Cold, but that doesn't matter anymore because it's going to go here where it's cold, so we're good, right? And then when it comes back in as cold blood, it's going to pick up the heat from the outgoing blood right here. So it gets to retain the heat inside of its body and pretend that it's warm-blooded. Does that make sense? Right? So if it generates heat, it doesn't lose the heat immediately like a normal fish would, or like a reptile. Instead, it gets to hold on to it and therefore it's going to be a lot more efficient and can swim a lot faster than a normal fish, than a normal cold water animal. Yeah, do
And then, so I'm assuming it would matter if they live in like a tropical, hotter water?
That helps, yeah. So if they live in a warm area, then that definitely helps. Yeah, it increases their metabolism. Okay, so this is the explanation that I just gave you guys. You guys can take some time at home to check it out. Okay. All right, so yeah, some sharks and tuna have the countercurrent heat exchange, enables them to be very fast, right? It's a physiological adaptation. So fusiform shape combined with symmetric tail and the countercurrent heat exchange make for a really fast fish, right? Put all three of these things together, and what do you get, right? You get a sailfish, right? The fastest fish out there. Well, I don't know, it might be, it's kind of debated, right? It might be sailfish, it might be the black marlin. It's gonna be one of those, right? Does it have a fusiform shape? Yeah. Does it have a symmetric tail? Yes. And well, you can't tell if it has a countercurrent heat exchange, but if you do quick dissection, you can tell, right? So countercurrent heat exchange makes for a really fast fish. Okay, now this sailfish, right? I know it looks like a swordfish, but it has a big dorsal fin. Okay, is part of a group of fish called the billfishes, right? And this being the bill, right? The billfishes. And if you want to know what are other billfishes, here they are. Actual swordfish, marlin, right? And sailfish, of course, is a type of billfish. And these things are highly prized amongst sport fishermen because they fight the hardest. They're the strongest and fastest fish out there, right? And they're huge. I had this one friend who told me about when he used to go on big sport fishing boats and catch these guys. And you know what he said he used to catch them? He said he used a mop because it would get tangled up in its bill. You know, I don't know the veracity of that, but that sounds pretty interesting to me. You know, they use a mop to pick up a fish like this. Okay, so very fast fish. And they all live in the Epi Pelagic. Alright, so keep in mind these are all fish. Phylum Chordata, right? Class Osteoides. Any questions so far on all these? Okay, so let's move on. Let's talk about why everybody's allowed to be so fast and why being fast is so popular in the open ocean. In the open ocean, there is only water, right? That's it. There are no obstacles, there's no hiding spots, there's no rocks or anything that you need to navigate around or under or anything. There is no habitat complexity. That's what it is. See this classroom? This classroom has habitat complexity. Could I sprint from here to the door? Could I?
Yeah.
Well, but I would have to be careful though. I wouldn't be able to go my top speed because I'd have to navigate my way around these tables. See that? Wouldn't it be better if I was sprinting on an open track? Be better, right? I'd be faster over there. Okay, so you know the type of environment kind of gives you a clue, right? This could be compared to the African savanna. The fastest land animals are in the African savanna because there's nothing to run into. Consequently, if you live in the jungle, being fast is no longer a good attribute. You just bump into all the trees, right? So in the ocean, same thing, right? No habitat complexity enables there to be no speed limit, right? You want to be fast. Why do you want to be so fast? Because if you're not fast, then someone else is going to put in the effort to be faster than you, and now you're dead. So you have to be fast too, all right? There's no speed limit, so everybody's trying to be as fast as possible. You don't want to be left behind, right? So when there's no habitat complexity, there's no place to hide. Being fast is a good idea, but also it also makes something like hiding very difficult, and we're going to figure out how do you possibly hide when there's nothing to hide behind, right? So we'll look at those options. Okay, so the first way to get away from predators is being faster than them, okay? These guys are really fast. If you have those attributes of a fast fish, symmetric tail or fusiform shape or something, then that's a good way to avoid being eaten, right? Just swimming faster than your pursuer, right? Okay. swim faster than them. But that's not the only way. Little fish, what do they like to do in order to stay safe? What do a bunch of little fish like to do?
Group together.
They like to group together, right? It's a behavioral adaptation called schooling, right? Schooling behavior right here. This is a way to escape predation because there's safety in numbers. And what I mean by that is, let's just say that there's only 3 fish swimming around. They're probably all gonna get eaten. Okay, there's just a few of them, a shark will come along, 1, 2, 3, right there. Okay, let's just say there's 1,000 fish now. All right, if there's 1,000 fish and the shark comes by, it'll eat a few, maybe like 10 of them. But the thing is, if you're swimming in a big school, the likelihood that the shark picks you is lower. Does that make sense? So by swimming in a school, everybody agrees that they hope that someone else will get eaten instead of them, right? That's the point of the school, right? That's one of the points at least. Someone will get eaten, but the likelihood is reduced if there's more and more fish, right? If there's only a few fish, like 10 or so, probably all 10 will get picked off, right? But if there's a lot, then they have that safety, okay? Additional perks of swimming in a school is, well, it's confusing, all right? I never understood this until I started spearfishing myself, but there's one school of this fish called an opalite. They're pretty easy to shoot too. They're like this big. Like 20 of them swam by me, and I'm like, whoa, look at all these fish. But I was like, I want that one. No, I want that one. Got so confused. I couldn't focus on one because there are just so many. And that's the problem. Being a predator means you have to focus on one. That's why we have eyes in the front of our head, right? But when there's hundreds of them, then you can't zero in on one, and it becomes really confusing, right? It's even worse when the prey is striped, right? Because if they're striped, then you can't tell where one begins and one ends. So that's why zebras are safe against lions and pilot fish are safe against sharks, right? Because you can't really tell what's a fish and what's half of the fish or something, right? So yeah, when you have a bunch of them, like you have to realize that a predator can only eat a couple at a time. It has to choose, but how do you choose when you have all these choices, right? How do you choose, especially when you're a fish and you're not super smart, right? So swimming in school offers that protection. And the last thing a school helps you with is you can do some cool swimming formations. So I'll show you one of them. So like a school swimming formation. Imagine if you had a bunch of fish here. Okay, let's just say you had a bunch of fish, right? And then a big pursuer comes from behind and it's fast, right? What do these fish do? They have an instinct to break off into 2 halves. Okay, I'm not sure how they communicate with each other to be able to do this, but they do that, right? This half goes this way and this half goes up. Which one is this going to go through? Which one? How do you choose which one when they're both equal, right? You can't. It's just going to swim right through and not be able to catch a single one, right? You'd have to have some level of intelligence to know that, okay, it's going to split into 2 halves, I'll always go up, right? But fish like these don't have that kind of foresight, and then these little fish will be able to get away, right? Because you have to be really committed to just choosing one and not the other, right? Because you're giving up half of your possibilities, right? Predators cannot think that far ahead. It's really difficult. Okay, so swimming in school offers several advantages. One is less likelihood of being eaten. The other one is confusing the predator because they don't know which one to choose. And third is swimming in interesting formations. When they break formation, predators cannot choose which side to go to. All right, so that's it about the behavioral adaptation and swimming fast. Now the last way that we need to talk about how to get away from predators is just to avoid being seen. Now keep in mind, the water is clear and there's nothing to hide behind. How do you avoid being seen in an environment like this, right? So what I'm saying is camouflage, right? Camouflage is easy if there's a background to camouflage against, right? For example, people in the military wear camo because the green usually goes against the trees in the background, and people who are in Iraq have like brown camo for the sand, right? But there's nothing here. So what are you gonna camouflage against, right? Some organism had decided to give up on camouflage and just be clear, right? And this way, hopefully they're unable to be seen. Okay, transparency is a form of camouflage, kind of. It's just a way of not being able to be seen, and it kind of works in all sorts of environments, right? As long as you're clear, you're good. From jellyfish, comb jellies, salp. So salp is a tunicate, right? We just learned what phylum this is from, by the way. What was it again? Can you remember?
Census 4.
Yeah, that's pretty
Or
close.
Tennophora.
Don't pronounce the C.
Tennophora.
Yeah, Tennophora. Yeah. So by being clear, right, this is one way to avoid being seen in the open ocean. And let's look at a couple more. Oh, this. All these little fish. You guys ever notice reef fish are colorful, whereas a lot of the fish in the supermarket are silver and boring. Why do we have silver and boring fish? Because silver is like a mirror and it reflects light. What is the only light available in the ocean? Blue. So if you reflect light, you will look blue light, you will look blue. And if you look blue, then you will blend against what? The water itself. Does that make sense? So by being silver, they are trying to blend against the water itself. Right? Silvery fish reflect light that is available, blue light, and then they'll just hopefully blend into the blue ocean. Okay, so that's why fish are silvery. Right? If the fish were blue, that could work, but that's not gonna be as good as silver because the shade of blue changes at the depth that you're at, so your camouflage is only good for one depth, right? So if you're silver, then you're adapted to any depth, and you'll reflect whatever color is available at that depth. So it's kind of very adaptable camouflage, right? So silvery things like a mirror reflect whatever light is available, usually some sort of shade of blue. Okay, and then the last one is having two tones like this. Here is a great white shark, right? Why do we call this a great white shark? Because its body, its belly, its ventral surface is white. But I had to say that this is a very dumb name because let me show you what else is a great white shark. That blue shark, that tiger shark, right? Look, other great white sharks. Even this hammerhead is a great white shark, apparently, right? Even these, right? Whale shark, manta ray, even that Pokemon is a great white shark. So what's going on? Why do they all have a dark top and a white belly? It's their camouflage mechanism, right? Let me show you what they're trying to do. Dark on top, light on the bottom, right? If you look at this shark from the top, you see the dark top. What's below the shark? The deep ocean, which is dark. See how it blends in? If you look at the shark from below, you see its stomach is white. What is above the shark?
Light.
The light from the sun. It blends in depending on where you are looking at it, right? Above or below. So this is called countershading, right? Countershading, depending on your viewpoint, right? Your point of view, it will blend into its background, right? And it's pretty cool because you think that, no, that's never gonna work. What if I see it from sideways and it's like half dark and half light? Well, the ocean is three-dimensional. What's the likelihood that you'll be able to see it sideways, right? Look at this. If you have all these different depths to work with, and here you have a counter-shaded thing. You'll only be able to tell it's counter-shaded if you're right here. But you could be here, you could be here, you could be here, or you could be here. It's much more likely that you're in one of these places, so you'll experience the counter-shading. You only not experience it if you're in this one spot. So the shark kind of sacrifices this being level with it for the greater probability that you're gonna be here, 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 and you won't be able to see it. Okay, So countershading relies on you being above and below, and it works because the ocean is three-dimensional, and it's pretty cool, right? I'll show you a little example. Countershading. Look at this. From the bottom, see the white belly bending against the light. Kind of, I mean, it's trying its best, right? Maybe it's big enough that it doesn't even need to worry about camouflage, right? I'd say camouflage for a shark is not so it can get away, it's more of so it's not seen during the ambush, right? And then a killer whale has even learned how to be countershaded as well. Okay. All right, let's take a look at this. This is an aquarium, and at the bottom of the aquarium is a painted black circle, and this aquarium holds penguins, which have a white belly and a black back, right? So let's watch penguins swimming across this and see if the countershading actually works. Where did that one come from, right? Okay, so penguins being countershaded, if the bottom is dark enough, then its countershading will work, right? Okay, so that's the idea, having one side dark and having one side light. You don't want your ventral surface to be dark, and you don't want your dorsal surface to be light. That defeats the purpose, right? Okay, that makes sense? We go to that? Okay, so I think we'll end here for now, and we'll continue and finish this lecture tomorrow. Okay, so we're gonna continue off where we left from yesterday. We just finished talking about countershading. Okay, so hopefully you guys remember the video that showed penguins swimming across this black portion, which represents, what does the black portion represent? What's this represent? No, like this black circle thing. What does that represent? It represents the deep ocean. Okay, the deep ocean, which is dark. Okay, so if they swim over the deep ocean, hopefully they look invisible. Okay, good. So anyways, let's continue on. The next thing we're going to talk about is senses. All right, so senses is something that every organism has. Okay, it's not unique to epipelagic organism or anything, but they have some special senses that we should get to know and why they have those special senses, right? First of all, what are senses used for? And what would you like? What do you guys use your senses for?
Surveying the area.
So like finding information, right? Getting information about the environment around you, right? Well, in general, organisms, right? They use their senses to do something like this, right? These are probably the main tasks: finding food, right? Finding mates, detecting threats. Okay. The point is they're using senses to find things, right? So when you're trying to find something, and here in the Epipelagic, it is open space, the water's clear. Finding something is not too hard, right? There's nothing for the organisms to hide under, right? It's just open, clear water, right? So what's a good sense for open, clear water? Well, considering that it's clear and visibility is good, then it would pay to have good eyesight. Does that make sense? Right? You might as well want to take advantage of the light available, since there is. So most of the fish that live in an environment like this end up having very big and well-developed eyes, right? So they're trying to take advantage of the fact that there's abundant light. Okay, so eyesight is a very good sense for these guys, right? Other things like thresher sharks, right, have also very big eyes. And that's just to take advantage of the fact that visibility is very good in the Epipelagic. Okay, but no matter how good their eyesight is, it's not as good as their best sense. What is their best sense? It is not smell. It is hearing, right? Okay, so remember, in the ocean, hearing is the default best sense because sound always travels further than anything else. Okay, so hearing is the best sense. That goes for sharks as well. And so, since eyesight is limited by water's visibility and the fact that light cannot travel through water that far, then there are some animals who've decided that, or maybe not decided, but they've evolved a way in which they can see further by not using light waves but by using sound waves to see. Okay, so seeing with your ears, how would you do that? Well, here's a dolphin, and the dolphin emits some sound, okay, and then that sound travels forward really far, and the sound bounces back whatever is in its way. So if it bounces back on an object, or a structure, or a fish, and it hears their waves as it returns, then it knows it's there, right? Because the sound waves will return faster if there's a closer object, and they'll return slower if there's a far object, right? And if there's no object, then the sound waves will never return, okay? So that's their way of seeing, right? So their eyes are okay, but they can see much further if they use sound waves to see instead. So in the ocean, some organisms have figured out that using sound to see greatly increases their ability to see, right? So echolocation, what dolphins do, and now you guys finally know the whole reason why they have that big head, right? That big head. It's not a brain, right? It's actually something called a melon. It's probably involved in echolocation. All right, so here, eyesight and hearing are probably the two most important senses in the Epipelagic. Now I want to mention one other sense. It's not like a strictly epipelagic sense, but it's a really important sense just because I want to talk about how fish get around, right? So fish, how do fish know where their surroundings are? We're going to look back at Osteichthyes for a second, right? Fish swimming all around. Okay, I just found this really cool video of reef fish swimming around. Let's just look at this video for a second. Look at all these fish. There's like hundreds of fish around this one structure. They're just like swimming in and out of this thing. None of these fish bump into each other. None of them crash, right? Imagine a bunch of humans swimming this close in proximity, right? Arms getting tangled up, hitting each other because you don't really realize there's a person next to you when you're swimming, right? But all these fish, how do they like swim so well? Like they're all synchronized. They know where their surroundings are, right? They can tell where their surroundings are without even looking at them because they can feel, right? But they don't feel the way we do by touching something, right? Fish don't touch things. They actually feel water vibrations around them. So if there's something next to them and that thing next to them moves, then that thing next to them that moves will move the water, and that water will hit the fish, and then it'll sense that water vibration, and then it knows it's there, right? So it does that using a line of pores down its side. So it's called the lateral line, right? So lateral is the body position for side, okay? So now we know all the body positions, right? We know front, what's front called again? Anterior and back, posterior, and then this back side, dorsal, and the stomach side, ventral, and then this side, and there's all sides, right? But the side is called lateral, right? So this side, the lateral, they have these pores running down from the anterior to the posterior and on the lateral surface, right? Called the lateral line, and these things detect vibrations in the water. So this is a fish's form of indirect touch, right? In the Epipelagic, this lateral line is really important if you're schooling fish. All right, why do fish do that again? To try to escape being eaten, right? It's sort of like protection because if you're in a large group, then the chance that you're gonna get eaten is reduced, right? Okay, so if you're swimming in a big school and there's all these fish swimming around you, and how do they know like when to turn at the same time or not to bump into the other ones? They're not looking behind them. They don't know how many fish are behind them, except they kind of do because they feel them behind it. They don't see, right? They're feeling using their lateral line. Okay, so that would be useful if you're schooling fish, but it'd also be really useful if you swim around a lot of structures so you don't bump into them, right? So that's not an epipelagic thing. That's just kind of like in general, if a fish needs to feel its surroundings, it'll have a very well developed lateral line. So I got a couple examples here, right? These are some fish that I caught along these rocks, right? So this is a rock fish, and you can see a nice lateral line. This is called a cabezon, and it's got a lateral line as well. So these are not epipelagic fish, but they do swim around these structures, and to avoid bumping into them and to know what their surroundings are, they can feel the water vibrations using their lateral line. Okay, that makes sense? Okay, so in the epipelagic scene, this thing would be useful for fish that swim in close proximity to one so that's all I'm gonna talk about Census. Let's do a quick recap on this whole unit, right, or this whole lecture about the Epi Pelagic. When I told you about different ecosystems, I told you guys to concentrate on what are the challenges present and how do the organisms adapt and rise up to those challenges. Okay, so the challenges that are present in the Epi Pelagic are these right here, right? There's no substrate, there's no place to stand, they have to stay floating above 200 meters at all times. And the other one we talked about is the fact that there's no habitat complexity, there's no structures, there's nowhere to hide. All right, it has to either blend into the water itself or just be really fast and just run away. Okay, so these are some of the ones we talked about, and I wrote a couple of their adaptations over here that you guys can check. Hopefully all these make sense because we went over them. Right? But there's a third thing, right? There's a third thing that we did not address in this lecture that the open ocean is lacking. However, we know from an old lecture about profiles and stuff and primary production that the open ocean is lacking. What else is the open ocean lacking? Nutrients, exactly. What was the word for that again? Oligotrophic, right? So the open ocean is also oligotrophic, which means that there's not that many nutrients available. So what adaptation do you need in order to survive in such a nutrient-limited environment? Do you remember? You're like on the right track. You said it half correct, but then as soon as you said surface area, you were wrong. Right? So she said small. Is that correct? You want to be small? Yes. But what about the surface area if you're small? It increases, right? Okay, so you're small, so it increases the surface area, and something like cyanobacteria is able to take advantage of the fact that there's not that many nutrients. All right, so cyanobacteria, like the Prochlorococcus, has enough surface area to be able to absorb nutrients in such a oligotrophic ecosystem. Who cannot absorb nutrients in such an oligotrophic ecosystem? What was that?
Big organisms?
Like what? Macroalgae, right? The biggest of the primary producers, right? So mostly there's only small primary producers in the Epipelagic, such as cyanobacteria. Okay. Now here's the thing: if there's so much cyanobacteria around, then this becomes a food source. But here's the thing: if something is really small, then there needs to be a special condition in order to be able to eat something this small. So I'm going to introduce the concept of food size versus your body size. Okay, so food size versus your body size, right? If you think about yourself, right, your mouth is this big, right? And so you're gonna be eating something that's, I don't know, maybe like this big, right? Maybe like a burger or something. Something this big would fit nicely in our mouths and we can actually eat it, all right? We wouldn't actively try to go look for something that's this tiny, all right? So what I'm trying to say is, like, imagine trying to eat rice 1 grain at a time. That's just, gonna take a while. It's not efficient, right? It only works if we have a lot of it, okay? So in general, you wanna eat something like roughly the same size as your mouth, right? So what I have here is, if you have a big sea lion, it's gonna eat a big fish, and if you have a little sea lion, you can eat a little fish, right? This has something to do with their handling ability inside their mouth. Right? So like a big sea lion probably could not even handle the little fish, right? Because that little fish would probably swim right through its teeth and it won't even matter, right? So in order to eat something, you have to be just only a little bit bigger than it, right? That's the concept I'm trying to get at, the food size versus your body size, right? You can only be a little bit bigger than the food that you eat. You can't be substantially bigger, because if you are, then it'll probably not be able to be grasped by you, okay? So here's another way to look at it. Whales eat really small things. That's true, but that's because their feeding structure is really small, all right? Their feeding structure, the baleen, has really small spaces in order to catch the krill, right? So if I were to draw some sample of baleen, right, let me just draw some of those baleens. What if they look kind of like this? Right, so this is just an example. This may not be accurate. If this is what the baleen looks like, then this whale can catch a prey that is roughly this big. Does that make sense? Because it won't flow through the baleen. Okay. Well, that's cool. The whale can eat something really small because its feeding structure is closely spaced. However, even the whale has a limit. Whales can eat plankton, that's true, but they can only eat plankton that's this big. They cannot eat plankton that is this small. They won't be able to catch it. You see, it'll slip right through. They cannot handle something small. I'm not saying handle as in like they can't take it anymore. I'm saying handle as in they literally cannot grasp it. Okay? So food like that, right, you have to be only a little bit bigger than the food that you're trying to eat. Okay, and then you can catch those types of foods. Right, this is gonna come in handy in the next lecture that we're gonna get into, which is epipelagic food webs. But before that, I'm gonna have to introduce a few more organisms, right? So, oh yeah, this is the concept I was trying to get. To eat something small, you have to be very small. So keep that in mind. All right, so these are the next few organisms. We're gonna introduce 3 more organisms, 3 types of plankton, and they're all protists. Okay, so 3 more protistan plankton. And I need to introduce these because there's something different about these protistan plankton than the ones that we've already talked about. Okay, so I'll list off of some of the protistan plankton we've talked about already. Diatoms, dinoflagellates, coccolithophores. What do you know about all 3 of those? What's their feeding style? It's photosynthesis, right? Because they're primary producers. Okay, well here's the thing. It turns out that not all protists are producers, and we have something here like radiolarians and foraminifera that actually are another type of protist. They actually are not producers, they're consumers. They eat other things, right? So these things do not do photosynthesis. Right, so these ones, interesting ones that we need to take into account, right? And keep in the back of your head while we talk about the next lecture after this. Okay, so let's talk about radiolarian first. So the radiolarian and the foraminifera, I introduced them at the same time because they are both hard, right? They have a hard shell. So now we're gonna have to learn another, hard-shelled organism and what it's made out of. Anybody want to guess what this one's made out of? Why did you guess that?
Clear.
Because it's clear? Yeah, that's a good guess, Okay, so anyways, radiolarians are silicious. Yeah, you're right, okay? So now we have a 4th silicious organism. Diatoms, silicoflagellates, hexactinellids, and now radiolarians. Okay, so radiolarians is a silicious protist, and notice how I called it a zooplankton. Why did I do that? Why did I call it a zooplankton? It's not an animal, it's a protist. Right?
Isn't it animal like that?
Okay, I did say it's animal-like, right? But why is it animal-like? What's its feeding style? That's the thing. It consumes, right? It doesn't do photosynthesis. If it did photosynthesis, then what would I have to call it? Or I meant what type of plankton would I have to call it? A phytoplankton, right? Remember, the second classification scheme that we went over yesterday of plankton is phytoplankton or zooplankton, depending on whether they're producer or consumer. Okay, so these ones, they're not animals, but they're consumers, so we're gonna have to call them the zooplankton in this case. Okay, here's another one, foraminifera. Okay, not all of these are plankton, but some of them are. The other ones that are not are just on the ground. And these guys are also, zooplankton, and, well, this is the other hard one, so just take a guess. What is this one made out of? No, that's the other one. Right, so one of each, right? This one's calcareous. Okay. Yeah, so they're not both silicious. This one's calcareous, right? So we have a silicious one and we have a calcareous one, foraminifera. They kind of even look like snail shells a little bit. Maybe it'll help you guys realize it's calcareous. Okay, so these are the 2 hard-shelled ones, and I'm going to show you one that doesn't have a shell. Right? It's called a ciliate, right? And it's called a ciliate because they have cilia, right? It's a protist that has cilia. Cilia are hair-like projections off of the sides. Okay, they're not long, they're short, right? If they were long, you would call it a flagellum, but it's short, so you call it a cilia, right? So if you have a bunch of those little hairs, it's called a ciliate. And this is another type of protist that lives in the ocean. And they are not phytoplankton. right? They're zooplankton because they eat.
And for all this, like all the plankton, are they like noticeable? Like if you're swimming in the ocean, like if they're like really small, right?
They are noticeable sometimes, right? When are they noticeable?
On the microscope.
No. Like, if you were just to go out yourself. Isn't there a time when they're noticeable? Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, at night, dinoflagellates light up, right? Okay, when else are they noticeable?
During the day, they're phytoplankton.
But, like, how do you see them?
The light, they're green.
They're green, okay. In general, if you have really murky green water, that also means phytoplankton. But I was trying to refer to the algal blooms. What color does I just said it. Right? What color does the water become? No, what did I just say? Red, right? Okay, it becomes red because it's called a red tide, right? Okay, so during the red tide, then you can also notice there are phytoplankton present. Does that make sense? As for these guys, how do I notice if these non-phytoplankton present? Probably can't, because they don't have pigments, right? They don't have like fucoxanthin or chlorophyll or phycobilins in them for us to notice in large quantities. Okay, they're mostly clear. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, cool. So anyways, that's gonna be the end of this one, right? Here are 3 new plankton and protists, but not phytoplankton protists, zooplankton protists, that I'm gonna have you guys know because it's gonna help us understand the concept in the next lecture. All right, so any questions on this?